Welcome to the Nightbird Radio Podcast. I'm Timothy Saylor, and I'm going to be your host this evening as we sound out the subconscious, navigate the nocturnal, and explore the farthest reaches of our experience, coming at you from the back of an 86 Dodge Ram van on the rolling foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the Great Forest, deep in the heart of the Kali Yuga. This is radio for the hauntological turn. This episode of the Nightbird Radio Podcast was brought to you by me. If you'd like to support the show and hear your name or a cryptic message in lieu of your name read at the top of the next episode, head to nightbirdpodcast.com and navigate to the Support the Show page. And remember to subscribe to this show wherever you listen to your podcasts and give me a 5-star rating. That helps a lot. I'm also on Instagram at Nightbird Podcast, on YouTube at Nightbird Podcast, and on Telegram at t.me/NightbirdRadio. And welcome back, Nightbirds. It's great to have you back, and it's great to be back. This week I was rejoined by Noah. We talked about high strangeness in the city versus the country, the effect of belief on paranormal phenomenon, the effect of randomness on enchantability, making room for spirit, the universality and importance of ritual, the wisdom of the dead, land spirits and the land as ancestor, spiritual ecology, and so much more. But without further introduction, let's get to the conversation. Noah, welcome back to the Nightbird Radio Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me back on.
Thanks for coming back.
I wanted to do this topic of talking about, I don't even know how to summarize it, talking about like high strangeness and the city versus the country, and maybe even like the present versus the past, because I get this sense that there's been a big shift in the amount of high strangeness that people experience. Because if you look at like medieval things, like they experience it all the time, and obviously like the explanation for that in modern era is, well, everyone born before 1900 was insane. That doesn't really jive with me, because like I know that spirits exist, and yeah, so I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that too.
I think there's a couple things going on there. I think one is that the whole idea of like, and I can't remember where this idea comes from. You might be able to fill me in. The idea that cultures that believe in magic have stronger results when magic is done. Right?
Yeah, I think I'm actually not sure where that comes from, but I think
neither.
It came from some kind of anthropological study or something along those lines. I do remember one of my interests is the late 19th century spiritualist movement, and this isn't really talked about too often, but there was actually a very strong trend of very talented physical mediums that were able to do pretty incredible things, or reported to do pretty incredible things under very strict controls. And they apparently like would even do like stage performances, I guess you would call them. And apparently like part of the audience would come out saying that like that was the craziest thing they ever saw, and part of them would come out saying that nothing happened, which I find
that's
really
fascinating.
interesting.
Yeah, I think that is actually like probably a good cross section of what happens in any sort of high strangeness event, be it like a haunted house or seeing lights in the sky or experiencing all the kind of things that happen in the woods. You know, imagine being out there with your friends or in a house or something like that. And that's a pretty good cross section of like the people that will be like, oh, this is something, and then the people that will be like, this is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I was I'm thinking back to so one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this with you is one of my favorite things to do is find like modern day penny dreadfuls on the internet. Like I scour Reddit, I scour Instagram, like I've pulled a bunch of stuff off 4chan's export, and I would
Oh
bet
yeah, like copy pastes and stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
And I'm sure like 75 to 80% of it is just BS. Like I maybe less than that, I don't know, but like I get the sense that I've kind of developed a kind of approach as to how I determine like whether online stories are real or not, or like actual paranormal activity or not. And there's some really interesting like diamonds in the rough. And one of my favorite things to read about is like stuff that happens in remote places.
Yeah.
And I find that super interesting because it seems to be, like someone could always argue it's like all made up or whatever, but I've seen something move on its own. So I know that like there's a lot that's possible that isn't really, doesn't really happen in the kind of public or official sphere. And so like I wonder how much like your state of mind or your context or like, what the intersection between all those things are.
Yeah, and I think and I just realized that I called it copy pastes, which is like such a boomer way to thing to call it. It's copy pastas or creepy pastas.
Yeah.
Is that one of them copy pastes? Uh, um, yeah, I think okay, so I definitely wouldn't mind going into some of those because there's like some really compelling ones. Um, you know, this is kind of where we get into myth territory where it's like, okay, maybe it's made up, quote unquote made up. Or maybe like, is that real? But like the fact that it is an idea that exists in the psychosphere means to an animist that it is in some sense real. Like it is a being within existence just by virtue of the fact that it is there. And so I think especially when like something goes viral, I think a good example of this was that I shared a picture in a group that we're in of like lightning striking the Cristo Redentor. And
Hmm.
it's like, okay, I'm sure that happens all the time, right? It's a big statue on a mountain in the sea. Like I'm sure it happens all the time. But the fact that it went viral at this time says more than just the picture, right? Like why did that kind of get sucked up into the psychosphere and kind of spun around?
Hmm.
That's what I find interesting. So did it happen? Didn't it? I don't care.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we were just this is a kind of a tangent, but I think we were just talking about how like as if you're involved in these realms and even if you're a complete fraud like Carlos Castaneda, um, you still come up with like insanely insightful things, and it's almost like
Yeah.
you kind of like plugged into something or like the
Well,
act
it's
of
like,
that theater.
is bullshitting kind of channeling in a way, right? Because it's like there's
Hmm.
a very mercurial aspect to that. It's kind of like a game of wits. Uh,
Yeah, and oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. You're good.
Yeah, and I wonder about that a lot when I'm reading a lot of these. I can send you some links of where I get some of these things from if you want, but like when I read about a lot of these things, like there's some that are just like clearly like quote unquote fictional. But the thing that came to mind for me is Slender Man.
Yeah, that's a good
Uh,
one.
yeah, and that was we actually know the quote unquote like origin of that. Like we have the something awful forum posts that coined the term and all of this stuff, but there seems to be well, it's kind of the question of where thoughts come from in the first place. Like we don't select our thoughts. When we start a sentence, we might not know how we're going to finish it. They just kind of show up, and you just have to kind of trust the process. And in a living universe, in a universe where a human being is more than just a single solitary ego, but actually is an ecosystem. Those thoughts can come from a lot of different places, and a lot of discernment is needed in dealing with them.
Yeah, and I think that's another really like Slenderman is a really good example of like it was almost like it was an idea whose time had come. It was like this archetype that was just kind of waiting to come out. And then of course you have the events of like those girls that like stabbed. I don't know if the girl actually even died, but they like stabbed their friend in the woods because
Hmm.
of the influence of this. So you have this. What is a myth? What is an urban myth, or whatever you call these things? Reaching out and touching the world in a very real way, and
Hmm.
I can only see like I feel like that's only going to happen more as we move into like weirder country here.
Absolutely. And it tends to, this might be part of a conversation on like city versus rural, but I noticed that it tends to come from the fringes. Like it's the people that are pushed aside, and that's very like trickster in the paranormal type territory. But it that's where new mythologies come from. That's where the all the mythology around like UFO stuff has basically no official sanction on it. It was developed as a kind of like print culture first and now internet culture. But one of the really big abduction cases was Betty and Barney Hill. And I would argue that they were fairly marginal for their time and place, and they were in a very remote area when it happened. And I think there's even physical evidence for that case.
That's interesting to think about. Yeah, they
And I
were on the
wondered,
outskirts because it wasn't. They were
it
interracial couple in what 19.
was like 55 or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
And I wonder too, like how much of this is um, due to like our culture or what our culture considers centered versus peripheral. Because I think back to like ancient Egypt or Rome. And in Rome, you had like, I don't know, like Roman emperors would like spend the night in temples to get visions from their gods. So, like, that is about as centered as you can get in that culture, like an emperor, like doing these rites. And so I'm not sure it has to do with like center versus periphery in itself, but maybe like our center versus our
Well,
periphery.
maybe it's a function of or a symptom of what happens when you push these things out of the center completely.
Hmm.
Um, and they kind of like agglomerate around the periphery and condense to the point where they come through, they kind of crash through.
Yeah, and I
Those
was
channels aren't, um, you know, like the idea of the emperor doing that. Well, that's like it existing at the center, like you said. Like if the emperor is the center of that society, then there's a channel where that is coming through at the center. But close all those channels, and then you got dragons on the outer territories. But go ahead with what you were about to say.
yeah, I was no, that's a really good point, and it's really interesting to be alive in this culture at this time because you get like this welling up of phenomena that are real but have no official way of interacting with it. And I think even like 50 years ago, like the Catholic Church, you know, doesn't have the greatest methods of dealing with the invisible, but it has very powerful ones. Or I should say, it doesn't have the greatest like understanding of what the invisible is, in my opinion, but it has really powerful ways of dealing with it. And now we're at a point where basically people don't get these things from anything in their society. They don't get it from government, education, religion, and it's like completely peripheral. Um, but I was the thought that came to mind for me was I think I was listening to a podcast recently about how the more locked into a routine you are, like the harder it is to have like high strange phenomenon or even to get magic to work.
Yeah, do you experience that?
I was thinking about this and like I don't know. I feel like it's a part of my life and just kind of I have like a normal amounts of like magical things that happen to me.
Yeah.
But I also feel like it's really hard to let the best thing or let something spontaneous happen if there's no room for spontaneity. Like I think there is a kind of spontaneous element to the magical realm or the spirit world or something like that. There's a naturalness, or maybe
I
that's
was
not the right word, but
I was gonna say that it seems to me, in my experience, and I can only speak for my experience, that it's not so much about the rigidity of the schedule of my life, because like sometimes if I can get that like good monastic style life going, where like this is when I do this, and this is when I do this, and this is when I do this, I can really get things popping. To me, what it really seems to be is more of like, am I putting myself in the place where it can happen? So like, am I putting myself into the world? Am I putting myself
hmm
into like where things are being mixed up together? Um, that to me says more. And I guess there is a sense of randomness and chaos rather than structure, to say like going to a party. Like I don't know what's going to happen at the party. Like I'm putting myself in a situation where like really anything could happen, as opposed to I probably know what's going to happen if I sit in my room and play video games. Like I'm going to sit in my room and play video games. That's not to say something can't happen, but yeah. What do you think about that?
I think that's a really good way to look at it, because I was tossing this idea back and forth for myself, and I was like, I really need to be like more enchantable. And if I spend the night in my apartment and I don't, I don't have any of that room for spontaneity. Like I'm not going out and looking for other beings. Like it's really hard to have stuff to happen.
And like even if it's the
I
woods, like we were talking about, the woods is full of those possibilities.
Yeah, even just like wandering through the city to a place you haven't been before,
That's a big
uh,
one.
all sorts of things could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think about how, yeah, there has to be a kind of like field of activity for it to take place. Like if you wake up and the first thing you do is look at your cell phone, and then you hop onto the computer and you spend all day working, and then at the end of the day you spend all night watching TV, and then you go to bed again. Like there's really no room for spirit. Uh,
Yeah.
like even if something was really trying to get your attention, that's a really hard thing to get beyond.
That's interesting that you mentioned this, because I have actually found like, okay, so when I first started doing like app based um delivery gig work, I was like, oh, this is going to be like really enchantable. It's not.
hmm
It's really
It's not.
not. No.
Oh, well,
I didn't find it to be so. Like maybe some nights I could make more or like get a really good tip, but like honestly, and I don't know why, like I think the fact that it's mediated through this uh, kind of this interface, it takes something from it. Like I feel like it's much more enchantable to wait tables in person than it is to like deliver food in a car, like over an app. Especially
that's really
now, you
interesting.
don't even like hardly ever see the person, you know?
Yeah, you're just like, yeah, that's really interesting. I was thinking about this in terms of dating, actually, like a dating app or an algorithm. Like there seems to be something about computers that, and maybe this is connected to our like electronics networks,
Mm,
but there seems to be something about computers that don't really allow for that spontaneity somehow. Like even the algorithms that are like that try to like sort all this random data, they computers aren't really good at randomness. Like they just don't do it really.
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and I wonder if it has to do with like the actual fields as well. Um, if you're like, hmm. Okay,
I
because this
was
we could get back to the city conversation with this. Like, I feel like part of what makes the city different than the country in terms of spirit contact is like the actual amount of electricity and actual sound and noise and light that's kind of like filling the air. But now
mhm.
I do think, and this might be a tangent we can get into here in a bit, but I do think that they come through in other ways in the city. But what were you gonna say?
Yeah, I was thinking about this exact same thing over the last week, and I am I drive to St. Paul somewhat frequently, and that's a decently sized city. And sometimes I feel like the spirits of like the old 30s mobsters are just going to walk around the corner. But there does seem to be a big qualitative difference. And I read the book The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, which is I think about a little over a century old. They're written by an American theosophist who went and collected stories from the Celtic nations about fairies, and there's some really astonishing stories in there. And it was really interesting to me that there was that amount of high strangeness that recently in a quote unquote Western society, and also that the people who told those stories, they said that if you wanted to get like fairy contact, you would go to the west of Ireland, which is like the like wildest place in Ireland, and you would like sleep in a cave on a beach for 3 days without having any kind of communication with another human being. And I thought that was really interesting because that's before electricity, and I think that was around the time that electric lighting first started to, I think, be used in a lot of places. And I think there's a comment in the book about how electric lighting like stopped those stories or interrupted those experiences somehow.
That's interesting. Well, it blocks the starlight for one thing, which you could look
Yeah.
into. Like that could be a very real um detriment.
Yeah, and I think about how, well, going back to like talking about like looking at screens all day versus like being open to things, like I'd imagine that people in the past had a decent amount of time throughout their day where they would enter what we would call an altered state of consciousness. Like so much in our society is designed basically, I think maybe even intentionally to keep us in a certain like alpha or beta wave state. I don't know exactly which one it is, but I'd imagine there was a lot more variance throughout the day for somebody who didn't have a smartphone or didn't really have a screen.
yeah, I would think so.
But
Because I
yeah, and
think,
then
go ahead.
well, it seems to affect, well, it affects us, but I really I think like you were saying, it affects the spirits themselves too. I'm just like not quite sure how. Like there's definitely spirits in the city. Like I think the city itself could be a spirit on its own, but
Oh, certainly.
there's a difference there.
Yeah, I think that one interesting difference is that I just think it's kind of like what's around gets used. So like when I was living in I'm kind of in the suburbs now, but when I was like downtown, um there was definitely a buzzing energy, especially in Atlanta. It's very like alive. And in the springtime, it's like that place is just covered in plants and it just like comes alive with life. Even the city. But I would see synchronicities in graffiti, and then like I feel like I encountered a lot of spirits through people. So like
Hmm.
there's a lot of people there. So that's how it's going to come through, you know? And there were times when I was like, was that even a person or was that like just a straight up spirit? But it doesn't really have to be the spirit. Like it could be a spirit riding someone for a second to give a message. And I think I have an interesting like kind of take on this. Like I think that people that pray are in some network where that stuff is able to come through them um in a more straightforward manner, right? So like if I am having this like message that needs to come to me, if I'm around someone that prays a lot, like the possibility for that to come to me through them is going to be higher because they can hear that voice and act on that impulse. Not to say that people that don't pray can't do it, but I just think that you're connected to the field in some way, and I think that that can happen with in a negative way too.
Oh, it totally can. It makes me think back to Patrick Harpur's books, how nature, maybe not the greatest word here, but nature shows the face that you show back at you, like, or it shows what you show to it, and it's shy, or it responds to different attitudes.
Mm. Yeah, we kind
And
of co-create. It's
and
like
something that
we
comes up
call
for
it
me
up.
is Spirited Away.
I love
Uh,
it so much.
One of my top 10 favorite movies, to be honest. But I think about how uh, Haku is banished from his home because a river was filled in. And it makes me think that there's certain types of spirits that are not at home in around so much human activity.
Yeah,
Actually,
and
I
they
had a
they
really,
present as malefic, just like that mud monster turned out to be like that river spirit once it
yeah.
was cleaned, right?
Hmm.
And they were like afraid of it, and it was a terrifying thing, and it was causing all this chaos. But it just needed like attention and love and to be taken care of to be able to be like that cool dragon again. I think
Yeah,
that's a lot of the time what's going on.
and it makes me think of the I forget which sect of Buddhism does this, but when you're being troubled by a demon, I think it's in China they do this. Like, when you're troubled by a malefic spirit, you treat it as if it is a god, and then it'll start behaving like one.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I was
that's a
like, that's great
great.
tech.
Yeah, that's great tech for a lot of things. We were just talking about this actually in the Numinats Discord.
Want to hang out with other nightbirds and soapheads? For only $5 a month, you can gain access to the Polytechnic of the Numinauts, a private Discord server for artists, animists, and searchers that brings together the Nightbird Radio and Soapbox podcast communities. Just click the link I've provided in the show notes to get started. Now let's get back to the conversation.
We were talking about this in the sense of like treating
The
treating your suffering or like your even your enemies or people that cause you pain or difficulties, treating them as gurus and teachers, and the kind of perspective shift that comes with that. And I've experienced that in my life. I mean, I do that with a lot of things. I I look at my addiction that way. Like it's been my greatest teacher. It actually pushed me towards a spiritual path, which is not where I was at the time, and it gave me this ultimatum of like live along spiritual lines or die, which can sound kind of rough, but it's like, well, it simplified things for me. It made it so that um the choice was pretty easy. Like, I don't want to die.
yeah, I had a really similar experience, and it reminds me of Rilke's "Don't kill my demons, you might kill my angels too."
Oh yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
So
and
I
I
think
think about
no, go ahead.
oh, I was just thinking about like the city and like what gets pushed out, and I wonder if part of it is we've set up a society where spirits are not a part of the inner life of most people. Like, they are. Like, I think that spirits are, and I think everyone is a spirit, and have, a kind of ancestors and guides and stuff around them. But I don't think people give them almost any conscious thought. And our society is set up and organized in such a way that it doesn't you don't recall them at all. Like, I think about Japan, and Japan has shrines everywhere to various spirits and throughout the city, and people will stop and pay their respects. And if you ask them if they believe in them, sometimes they'll say no, and they'll just do the action anyway.
Do it anyway. Yeah, belief is it's neither here nor there to me, honestly.
Yeah, and I wonder if that comes from, like, we have a culture with a religion that very strongly emphasizes orthodoxy, correct belief,
Yeah.
believe and you'll be like all this kind of stuff, and that's
Well,
not really that.
believing is the personal eschatological answer to it. Like, you have to
Mhm.
believe in order to get it. And that really takes all the a lot of the focus off the idea of like, well, What about doing things? Like, you don't have to.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder if this is a double-edged sword that gave us like new thought and also like destroyed all of our relationship with our land spirits, because it's this very, very strong emphasis on thinking and not relating or doing, or and the idea of belief as a kind of like salvific thing seems to be very much a like Christianity and Islam thing. Uh, Even Judaism doesn't emphasize it all that much, and most cultures in the world seem to, they disagree on a lot, but what they want to agree on is like what they're doing. Like
Yeah.
I think about like in the Roman Empire, like people had all sorts of different opinions on what the gods were, but they all got together and did the same like festival honoring them. It's Yeah, belief is a kind of like new thing.
Yeah, because what I do actually comes forth from what I know. I think more so than what I believe in that sense, and so that's kind of where I come with the Gnostic stuff. Like, um, it is the way to defeat ignorance. That may not be the best way to put it, but like that knowing, is where it's at.
I like I remember when Carl Jung visited, I think he was visiting the Hopi, and they had a ritual that would make the sun rise in their cosmology. They were like participating in the rising of the sun, and a lot of their young people had stopped performing this ritual. And Carl Jung asked the elders, well, what will happen when nobody does this ritual anymore? And the elders said the sun will no longer rise. And he understood them as saying that not in the sense that they thought the sun would literally stop rising, but that in a certain like spiritual sense it would stop. And there's a kind of reinforcing between action and knowledge or gnosis. If you, like you're saying, like the act like reinforces the knowledge and the knowledge reinforces the act.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that story. I've gotten some gnosis too about animals in that way, like their rituals, the things that they do, cause the seasons to change. It's not like, or like their coincident. They're the same event. So like the squirrels doing their gathering, it actually is causing, that wheel to turn. Um,
That's super cool.
and it's one of those things where it's like, I like metaphors that are so, like, a poetic metaphor can't actually be disproved. Like, you can't say it's not true, because it's, for one thing, it's a metaphor, but it's like, like it's unassailable in a way. Um that's like when I know I'm getting that good download.
Well, it also puts you in a different frame than a universe of like objects that crash into each other, and that's all there is. Like instead we have like a universe of like mutual receptivity and participation.
Yeah, that, like, and I think I have this kind of same idea about magic. Really, it's that, it's almost like the ripples that go backwards in time from the event, are my magic, or even preparation, but like magic specifically, like, I'm not causing these things to happen. These things are going to happen, and therefore magic is done in anticipation of the events happening. And maybe that's just like a good way to look at it. I don't know, but it seems to be effective.
It seems to me like ritual is like outside of time in some
Yeah.
sense.
Nightbirds, I hope you've been enjoying the conversation so far, and there's more to come. But first, I have to ask that you support the show. As I'm sure you've noticed, there are no commercials on this show. There are no paywalls. You get everything up front. For there to be free dialogue, I think it must remain uncaged by the interests of advertisers.
But Nightbird Radio does cost time and money to make, and your support means I can spend less time delivering pizza and more time doing this. That's a win-win. So that's why Nightbird Radio is a value for value podcast. I hope you found value in this show, but I can't and won't dictate how much. Only you can decide that. But what I can do is invite you to take that value, turn it into a number, and head to nightbirdpodcast.com, navigate to the Support the Show page, and donate. We're also listed on podcastindex.org, which means you're able to send Bitcoin via the Lightning Network using your favorite Podcasting 2.0 apps, which can be found at newpodcastapps.com. I also accept services and dry goods in trade. There are many forms in which value is stored, after all. Email me at tim@nightbirdpodcast.com for more information. Sponsors will get a special mention at the top of the show. Thank you for your generous support.
I also think about how so many things that people don't think are rituals are.
Oh, yeah.
And talking about like cities, like I wonder if you could make the argument that something like Wall Street is like a temple to some very hostile deities.
Yeah, that's a temple to Mammon.
And they ring the bell at the end of the day, and everyone claps and all this kind of stuff. Like that's ritual behavior.
There's a ton of things like that. If rituals are actively participating in these greater events, then what events are our rituals participating in? Like the wider society, you know what I mean? Like what greater event is the ritual of getting up and the first thing you do looking at your phone? You know, that wasn't a complete sentence,
It's
but
kind
you know
of
what I mean.
well, it's frightening because it makes me think that I feel like we live in a society that has lost almost any kind of spiritual defense against
That's a really good way to put it.
forces that I think are, and even Christianity, even like Protestant Christianity, even like the most like milquetoast Protestant Christianity, like a couple decades ago, is something.
Yeah.
Not that it's like I said, I think it's a perfect way of relating to the invisible, but we're down from that to nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. At least you had the Holy Spirit. Now I don't know. I haven't really been to a church in a while. Maybe they're doing it. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like it.
I'm not sure even most like priests or pastors believe in God anymore, to be honest.
Right,
Like I'm not sure the Archbishop of Canterbury does. That reminds me, actually, there's a cemetery near me that has a chapel on it, and the chapel has these beautiful stained glass. It was built in a rather unusual architectural style, and I went there one time and I was alone, and I had the sense that the guardians of the graveyard were peering through these windows at me, like not in any kind of like directed way. They were just like looking in or
just checking you out.
it. And I thought about how we have so few ways for them to come through, like spirits like that. And I was on hallowed ground. I was in a sacred building where a lot of sacred activities had taken place, and it felt like good to be in there. Like maybe not like celebratory, like their graveyard spirits, but like it was like I was under their protection.
But good in that deep sense of what good means, just like that's interesting. So what? Okay, and I'll ask this is kind of a rhetorical question, but so what does someone have to do when they don't think you can hear them? They have to scream or talk louder.
Oh yeah.
So that's why like they're screaming right now to be heard. And so I think that is one thing that's that cities do have. And I'm not saying they don't have any kind of spirits in other ways too, but they definitely have dead. I mean, a city really is just like a big charnel ground if you think about it. And
I used to work. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, the dead are there and they live side by side with the people that live in the cities. And um yeah, I just think there's interesting implications of ignoring them because they do demand to be heard, counted, and named.
I worked in a building a few years ago that had an empty floor on it, and it was an older building. And I was talking to a custodian who is from West Africa, and so a culture that recognizes the dead. And he said, "Oh yeah, when floors are empty for that long, the dead will move in."
Oh wow.
Thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. That is really interesting. I like that a lot.
And I remember some of those stories too that I like to read online that apparently they're, and, I don't know what to make of these, and I can't verify, I can't not verify, but there's definitely like a mythic truth to them that the people that get kind of brushed aside in urban life, like people have lost their homes, like people on the edge, like are in relation positively or negatively to these spirits that are around.
Yeah, I one of the names I used to have for them was open sky people
Hmm.
because like they would like when I talk about people coming through with messages, a lot of the time it was them.
Yeah.
Just like in the same way that, and this is like a spirit of place thing. Like in the same way that spirits of place in the woods come through in a certain way, spirits of place in a city a lot of the time come through as people. And the thing is that if the spirits of place are not being related to when they scream, it can look very violent, I think. Like this is another place where that neglect is going to come through in ways that appear malefic or appear dangerous or violent or um ugly, but it's like these things demand our attention. And so it's again that idea of like look at the demon as a god, like, and I think that we can do this. I think that this is something that's possible to be done, and that like small groups of us are beginning to do this where this web can be formed where we begin relating to our rivers and to our forests and to our cities and to our graveyards and like just all these areas um starting, if we start making offerings to them and start just like saying hi. When you drive over a river, thank the river and see what happens. The
And,
worst thing that can happen is you look dumb, but like, whatever, who cares?
and they're also kind of ancestors in a way, almost like if you
100%.
like the blood of the Mississippi River quite literally is in me. Like,
Yeah,
um,
100%.
have you heard the story of the Oakland Buddha statue?
No, but please tell me.
I'll send you an article on this. It's fascinating. So there was a particular street corner in Oakland. I think this is a few years ago, that was experiencing like a high amount of crime and like gang related activity and all this stuff. So a Vietnamese man decided to put up a statue of a Buddha, and people started leaving offerings at the Buddha statue. And so there
Awesome.
were like wreaths and flowers all around this thing. And the crime rate plummeted like measurably. Like that simple act of putting up that statue, like and apparently someone tried to like remove the statue and wasn't able to, and apparently the city tried to remove it as like a religious icon on public land, and that failed too because the
Good.
neighborhood demanded that it stayed, even the people who weren't Buddhist. Um, and I'll send you the article on it. It's just amazing. But
Yeah, that's really cool.
and I think about my area has a fairly large population from Tibet, and I really like it when they put up the prayer flags. Just like
Who wouldn't?
yeah, it's beautiful, and I think it calls in good things. It's like a just the simplest doorway for good things to come through.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I'd like to see that.
And I
Yeah,
wonder too. Oh, go ahead.
no, you continue.
I wonder too, because even Europe and its like Catholic areas still has shrines around.
Right.
Uh, like there's like saint shrines and all these things, and we just don't have anything really.
I found a Virgin of Guadalupe shrine like up here, and it's like I was like really excited about it. It's just cool to see. You know what I mean? Everyone
Hmm.
obviously brings candles. There's a lot of candles burning at it, and it's just not very common here. Um, I do think that one of the ways that this expresses itself is when someone dies in an accident, and then that shrine kind of forms in that place. Um,
Hmm.
this is common everywhere, but in Phoenix, they get really big. They get like they become like shrines. And I like to pray for those. You know, if you see the name or whatever, I like to just like pop off a deca for them, you know. Just another way of like relating to place and saying to the dead like I see you. I see you. You are not
And it's
forgotten.
amazing. It's amazing too that when you put those things up, people will leave offerings, like even
Yeah.
regardless of individual belief in a lot of cases. It's just like the natural response to
It
them.
is a human behavior. It is like what we do. And
I
so
remember,
that's hopeful that it comes through, you know. We could do more.
and even in the strangest places, like you put up I think I saw a picture of a statue that was put up to Athena in a college, and people started leaving offerings
It's awesome.
at the
There's
statue.
there's a frog outside of my mom's house that my nephew loves. And my nephew started like leaving one day, like left some acorns and some little rocks he found in front of the frog. He's 2 years old. It's like it is ingrained. It's a human behavior.
I used to do that when I was a kid. I would take little things I would make to the forest and kind of because I assumed that's where they were, and I would just kind of leave them out there. And no one taught me to do that. I just did it
Right.
and
You
just
just
was
knew.
kind of aware.
Yeah. Um I think that that's a really just some good guerrilla ontology there, you know, that I'd like to see more of.
I actually a relative of mine. I'll be more vague here than it
Yeah.
might, but a relative of mine uh, had a garden for the spirits in the city and had like all these little pieces of setup, and I forgot where she found it, but she had like a set of like four things and then like found a fifth thing that like completed the set that was just like left at the house.
Yeah, yeah, nice. That kind of stuff is great. It makes me think too, like a good country example of this is like the what are they called? It's like gifting gardens or people do it for Sasquatch. They like designate an area where they will leave things for Sasquatch. And that is just you're honoring a land spirit.
Yes. And I've seen like little fairy houses in some state parks around here. If you like
Nice.
keep your eye out for them, there's like little things that people will just do.
I'm trying to think of more stuff like that.
Well, even leaving things at a cemetery.
Yeah. Oh man, there's a cemetery near me that's like walking distance from here that is like, and especially like, you know, it's a cemetery that's being worked when you go there and you see coins at the front gate. Like, okay, some people are here or know what's going on. And it's got like angel statues left at all different types of graves. There's all kind of cool stuff, but there's like a lot of things being left. And you can just feel the energy of the cemetery is just popping.
I frankly love cemeteries. Maybe that's like
I do too.
I found it really I found that them really reassuring actually during the lockdowns. Uh,
Yeah.
I would actually go there and just to like be there and be with the ancestors, and it felt really good. I have a story about that too. There's been times in the last year that I've been very scared about the future. I think that's the case for everyone right now. And I went to a graveyard that my ancestors are buried at, and I was just kind of overcome, and I just like asked them like, please, I need some help. Like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. And like a couple weeks later, I got a check in the mail from my uncle who said he was distributing investments made by my grandparents to all of the grandchildren. And the letter said, for the times ahead.
Wow.
Uh, they
Wow.
they listen.
They listen. Yes. That's a really cool story. Thank you for sharing that.
It
Yeah,
was
that's one of Go ahead.
it was one of the most powerful things that's ever happened to me. Uh, it's so easy to get in touch with them. Like I didn't do anything special. Like I brought them water, but I just talked to them.
Yeah. Talking to them and bringing them water is all it takes. Like,
Yeah, yeah, and
it's
it's
not like, and you can talk about this with in terms of like the spiritualists, or really, but like really in anything, I think a lot of the time, um, in especially in magical circles, there's all these like really complicated frameworks for like necromancy and calling in spirits, but like I don't know. Maybe that's more for people, and there's some people who that's their speed. They like doing that, but I don't find it necessary. Like,
yeah. I feel like maybe the kind of like hyper ritualization is maybe like a good introduction to a spirit or like communicating with them. But
or certain
once
spirits
you get
for
to
sure, but like the dead, it's just like they're humans. Just
yeah, just ask.
yeah, just talk to them. And I think the only thing that keeps me from experiencing them is myself. I'm getting in my own way. They'll talk. And a lot of the time it's like, oh, was that me? Oh no, that's just me. Well then, if I called your phone number and you picked up and then I doubted who you were and I was like, who are you? Who are you? What would you think the reaction would be? You wouldn't want to fucking talk to me.
Hmm.
Like, you have the phone number, just call and don't doubt who picks up because you call.
Do
That's
you
for the
swear by the Holy
listeners.
Trinity that you are James?
Yeah, right. I powerfully conjure and call you forth. Yeah, and so maybe there's some of that's probably better for like specific spirits, people I'm not related to, etc. But like, I've never really had a. I don't know.
I
Maybe
also
I just
find that
go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry.
I also find
Go
that
ahead.
if you want to get a ghost story out of somebody who doesn't believe in ghosts, ask them if their ancestors have like pinged them, and you'll usually get one.
Nice. Yeah, yeah.
If you're
Well,
comfortable with asking them. Some people are just like not going to deal with it at all, but I find that you can get something like that out of most people.
well, I think a lot of the time too with people they'll say, "Oh, I don't have anything," and then like if you talk long enough, they'll start talking, and it's like I kind of have done that too, and it's not even really a matter of like I didn't believe it. It's just like I didn't think I had anything of in that sense, and then I'm like, oh wait, no, there's this, there's this, there's this, there's like a bunch of times even before I
I
started like working with my ancestors, which that just hyperdrive.
I find that for me it helps. I got to actually get on this a little bit more and like make notes throughout the day, because if you like start paying attention to it, you'll notice so many more things. Um, and I like to make notes to like remind myself that this stuff is important, that I'm like recording my impressions. But yeah, it happens so often. One of the spirit experiences that I had like before I was even doing an intensive practice was at my grandfather's funeral. it was really cold out, and we were taking the casket into the church, and all of a sudden I felt like I had a perspective that was like 50 feet in the air, like looking down on this procession. And I sensed that it was my grandfather, and the language that came to mind was like he looked during the war, so when he was a lot younger. And it was almost hard to be like sad at that moment, because I sensed this like astonishment that he could be 50 feet above this church. And um yeah, it was just like a quick flash. But yeah, the dead are so easy to get in touch with.
That's a cool story too. Thank you again for sharing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is the antidote for so much of our woes. And I am so just like, I know that in my core, because so much of what's going on is a fear of death.
Yes.
And if people are afraid of death, they are easy to manipulate. But
Yeah,
once
anybody who will
I
promise you.
realize, yeah, man, right. But once I realize that there is no end to experience, that I might have a different experience. It might not be this experience, but there's no end to experience itself. Um, then, well, it's like the philosophers, or the mysteries. The goal was to die before you die. Um, and that can happen in a lot of ways. For me, it was like, actually dying. Um, but yeah, there's something that like, it's being invincible, as Gordon White puts it.
I remember I think this is in one of his books, but we have so much information about what happens after death. And people like kind of give me a weird look, because there's this kind of idea that we like can't possibly know that there's an afterlife. It's like, yes, you can.
Yeah,
We actually have vastly more evidence for an afterlife than like any culture beforehand. We have books on our shelves that like sages and mages 1,000 years ago would have given their left arm for.
right.
Um, it's just like, we do know, and I'm comfortable saying that. Like I've done enough reading and had enough experience that I know people survive death, and you can hold things so lightly after that.
Yeah, it really takes away so much of, and I mean, there's not going to be problems, you know what I mean? Because it's easy to forget these things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's like part of the whole idea of like remembering who I am. Well, that's a piece of it. The death piece is huge though, and that's another piece I put together. It's like getting the Triforce, you got to get all
Yeah.
the pieces.
When
Assembling
it's
the Triforce.
it's the praxis gnosis thing again too, because if you talk to the dead, then you are acting out your knowledge of life after death.
And it enforces it. And lo and behold, they are able to tell us things, like, and we're able to tell them things. Like, there's an intelligence exchange occurring. Um, and I just wouldn't, I just don't know where I would be if it weren't for that. I wouldn't be the same person. And I wouldn't have the life that I have. I wouldn't be able to do the things that I'm able to do today. Um, if I was still there, if I was still in that fear, you know?
I one time shared some of my life story with someone I shouldn't have shared it with, and she was like, "Well, why is this important?"
Hmm.
And I was like, that question kind of threw me, because it was just so obviously important to me that like someone's like, well, it's kind of like that the unexamined life is not worth living thing. Like if
Yeah.
you, I can't think of a more important question than, I have a culture telling me that I'm a meat robot, and when I expire, I disappear. That's a vastly, vastly different world than if I survive death. And I think there's this kind of like corrosive thing that there's a corrosiveness to that idea that like erodes people's psyches. Because if you believe that you're a meat robot that eventually turns off, you can't escape the implications of that. And the implications of that are like nothing you do actually matters. Like there is really there's no good, there's no evil, there's just a blip in time, and that's it. And
There's
even if
just
people don't
buying things.
yeah, and if people don't consciously think about that, I think it like honestly erodes their soul. I
Yes.
think it just like hollows people out.
I think it's one of those things that actually weakens your energy and astral body or whatever you want to like call that. It like actually diminishes that and makes you,
Yeah.
which feeds into your actual being and makes you weaker. Like not in a sense that like people that are stronger are better, but just like you said earlier, no spiritual defense.
Yeah, it just slowly erodes your soul. Like I don't think the soul can be destroyed, but if you're holding that on the inside, if you have this like conscious or unconscious idea that like, there's nothing more to you than that, like you're gonna act that out. You're gonna ritualize it.
Yes, you're going to ritualize it. Yes, and you're going to project it into the world in the same way that we call up what we are inside in our exteriors. And that's like a lot of what we're seeing. And um yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. I can speak again from experience because when I had this um what do I even want to call that? When I was in that mode of thinking or being, as someone that thinks about like that does examine these questions, like I've never not examined these questions or thought about the implications of these things. Um when I was in that, it was unbearable. It was like an unbearable state of being that like very much contributed to my leading, like trying to escape that through substances, right? Like and compulsive use of those substances. Um that's a really big contributor to my addiction was um was that the terror of that oblivion was too much for me to sit with.
I had a really, really similar experience. I was doing um, I'll be vague here again, but I had a night where like I just encountered that nothing, that just complete meaninglessness, like total nihilism, and I was just like, this can't be it. Like, there's no way.
Yeah.
Like I've experienced something else besides this. This cannot be it.
Yeah, and when everyone else is kind of screaming at you that it is, I mean, that's another thing. Like, I mean, I was also being indoctrinated into the idea that that was it, you know?
Yeah, and it's unconsciously shared so often. Like you said, it's like projected into the world. Like we watch these, like I can't even think about how many times I've watched like anything from movies to TV shows to documentary where there's this like offhand comment about how life is meaningless. Like
Yeah.
that destroys your heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does wound you. Or it did me at least.
So it did to me as well, yeah.
Yeah. um, so that's interesting. If we bring that back to, do you think that there is a connection here as to why I I don't know if this is like, it seems to be pretty quantifiable that like in rural areas there is more, at least religion, if not spirituality, like there's more belief, it seems like, right?
Hmm.
What do you see
I
there?
I think partially, I think it might be a factor. I think partially, I think there's like social factors too. Like I think rural areas are just inherently more conservative with the kind of slower pace. But I also do think that um, brushing up against the living universe, like, and I wasn't raised in a rural environment, so I'm not sure how much I can really speak to, but I have heard that when people share the idea of animism with people who like live right on the edge of the forest or like in an area where they're encountering like these living universe, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like
Yeah,
that's
like
that's
duh.
just it.
Yeah, that's just the experience.
I also think this is just coming to mind for me, but have you noticed that uh, I feel like this hasn't always been a thing, but people start saying the word humans when they refer to other people, like they're an alien. Um, and God, I had a bonkers experience at a bank where I went in to like take some money out, and there was this guy standing next to me, like just kind of like laughing very strangely with the teller who was giving him weird looks, and he was like, "How many humans have you had in here today?" And he kind of like looked over at me, and I was like, "What?"
Hello, humans. I too am a human person.
Yeah, and I see that on the internet all the time. Like people like that just I don't know. Like I mean, yeah, we are human, but it always like referring to people in that way really seems kind of like creepy to me. Like I even call
Yeah.
trees tree people. Like like um but it makes me wonder if there's like spirits in the city that like you said like speaking through other people that really don't like humans or like I think Jen Psaki, not to get political, but to get political, the former press secretary, like talked about like raising two humans, and it's just like that's a bizarre way to refer to your
It's
own
just,
children.
yeah, it's weirdly clinical and like it is like alien. It's like, yeah, it's so stereotypical alien talk, you know?
It's like Morbo and Futurama.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
and I wonder if those kind of things inhabit the city more than the country.
well, I could
Actually,
imagine if I was a spirit that had been in a place forever and then a city was built on top of me, I would probably feel the same way. I'd be
yeah,
like, damn, y'all. Really?
the one time I made contact, excuse me, with a land spirit, it was not happy. Uh, I feel like our kind of our grid patterns and our paving over everything of concrete makes a lot of things really unhappy.
Yeah. And well, it makes me unhappy. So I can only imagine how they feel. I've always felt that that concrete was like just a sin.
It's
Um,
like inert.
yeah. And it's like interesting that people talk about like pollution when they've covered the entirety of the ground with asphalt and they don't see that as some sort of a transgression. I've always felt
Hmm.
that way. It's just strange.
Oh, John Michael Greer said something about this like ages ago, but I can't remember where he sourced it. But apparently in the ancient world, the Greeks would like leave different areas of the land to the gods. Like they, like this is there'd be like a shrine to like Demeter in the middle of nowhere and all these different things. And apparently there's an ecological survey of those areas. And it turns out like the areas that were put aside for the gods were ecologically essential for the health of the like farming around that or something like that.
That's really fascinating. Yeah. So the implications of like a city where no place is really sacred, even like, even if you have like a building that's been there from the beginning, a lot of the times they'll just like tear it down and build like a stadium on it or something. If the money's good. Um,
Yeah.
so flip that, right? So if a place, and this, the implications of this are kind of scary. If a place that's been given over to the gods is essential for the survival of the ecosystem? What is a place where there's no consideration of the gods or no place is considered sacred? What is that place's effect on the ecosystem? And I would say that it's possible that it's the inverse of the other
I
one.
yeah, I shudder. I shudder to think at it. I and this kind of hits close to home for me because I in Minneapolis, I've tried to collect just little tidbits about what the Dakota thought about the area
Yeah, that's
and
good to
like
do.
where they thought was sacred. And the place where the Minnesota and the Mississippi rivers converge is called Bedote in Dakota, which means the confluence. And they say that it's where the world was created. It's where heaven mirrors earth. And I went down there because it's a park now, and you can go down there and like stand at this very very holy place, and there's like condos across the river.
Mm.
And I was just, I don't know, it made me really sad.
Yeah, there's a lot of that kind of thing here. So like the Etowah Mounds are about 45 minutes north um west of Atlanta. And it's just, it's pretty country once you get out there. And there it's an old ancient mound site. I don't exactly remember what um time period, but old. Um and they've most mounds, especially in like this is kind of a museum and a like a national, like maybe a state park or a national park, little area. And so the mounds have been rebuilt. Um, they're not the original structures, obviously, because you have to keep adding dirt to them in order for them to stay. So they rebuilt the mounds, and you can go up to the highest mound and look over the horizon, and there's like a nuclear power plant, like you can see on the horizon, and it's just like it's an affront. Um,
Yeah, and
the some of the effigies down here, it's kind of a similar thing. Well, like one of them, the Rock Eagle one that I've talked about on here a good bit is like it's 4-H land, so like it's been really well preserved and like really respected. Even though there's like a fence around the effigy, which is like okay, I get it protects the effigy, but it looks like the thing is like in jail. And the forest around there is pretty pristine, but then its partner across the river is owned by Georgia Power, and the construction around it is like even more prison like. It's like this thing is like being held in some sort of a cage. Um yeah, it's just like I don't there's like a give and take happening there where it's like this is not only a symptom of like how our society does, but this is also causing like one of those two-way streets.
yeah, I think it is having like a big effect, like the lack of relation to place and the lack of like, I'm trying to think of a better term than everyday holiness. Um, like you walk to work and you walk past a shrine. Like I think it really tears people apart. Like even if they don't know what they're experiencing, that's something that people have always done. Like no matter where you look on the planet, like people put up shrines and people relate to place in that way. And I think missing it is yeah, both a symptom and a cause of a really serious disease. And I think of to the like curanderos and who guard the plant medicine traditions. Like you'll have Westerners go down there and, how do we fix all of our problems? And they're just like, you've lost your connection to spirit, and that's why you're so screwed up. It's really that simple.
Yeah. Yeah. What pill can we take that will solve this problem? Um,
Hmm.
you know, what prescription is there for this? It's interesting to think about this in this sense though. Okay, so I'm going to try to bring this back to like a story from my life and we'll see where we go from here. One thing that does happen Okay, so the most profound haunting experience that I had, and I told the story on like I think one of the first episodes where I was telling my story. So if anyone wants to hear it in full, they can go check that out. Um, but one of the most profound haunting experiences that I had, and really like my first experience with this, that I knew of, that I know of, um, it was a paradigm shift for me. And so it's like I was in a place of total, um, I mean, beyond agnosticism, right? But I like wanted there to be ghosts. I've always been interested in ghosts. Like I've always watched those shows. And so like I was in a really interesting place because there's like all the skepticism surrounding it, but a willingness. And so when this being came through, when this spirit came through in really scary ways, it gave me no choice but to accept this new reality, or this reality that I had, maybe not a new reality, but one that I had ignored, um, or been conditioned to ignore. Um, and that I can see as like one of these turning points in my life that led me back to the life of spirit. And so I'm incredibly grateful for that experience, even though it was really scary and kind of awful at the time it was happening. I was also in a terrible place. So like, was it mirroring my energy? Probably. You know, and like that happens a lot with ghost encounters, and people will be in dark places in their life, and the ghost comes as dark. Um, okay, so once I integrated that experience, it became really important for me. So, what does that say about what we've been talking about? Like, there is a function here, and so when we, this is like the ushering in of a new era or something, right? Because when these things get ignored enough, they will spill over the gate. And as they did into my life, they will spill over the gate that we've built against them as a society. And I think we're seeing that.
Well, it makes me think too that I'm not sure there's ever been a civilization before that uh, had such danger attached to it. Like, you couldn't blow up the world in 1750. We can. And there's a kind of like horror of that. Like, it's almost like the spirit world is mirroring that kind of corrosion in the soul from like severing that connection to spirit, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, but the upshot of it is that when that happens, there's an equal and opposite upswelling of spirit back. Like that tear in the fabric is where spirit flows in.
Yeah. I was thinking about this too in the nature of the internet, and how it was a lot harder to do what we do in an era of like mass media where there's like, the television schedule and these are like the 6 shows you get or something like that. Like, not to say people didn't do it, but I think it's that reinforcing aspect. Like, there's positives and negatives of this with the internet, of course, but being able to like reach out and network and like reinforce your own experiences with others people's is, I think, extremely powerful, and I think that's going to be a very major factor in bringing this stuff back.
Yeah, I think that was actually an effect of the internet that was not intended, and like luckily they didn't foresee it, because I don't think it was created under innocent motives.
Yeah, and I think one of the Rockefellers at one point said like we shouldn't have let the internet be as open as it was, or something like that.
Whoops.
So yeah, so they're kind of like conscious of it, which is weird. But yeah, I was talking about this with on the soapbox, but the how it's interesting how the proliferation of this technology, which I think probably had supernatural origins, not gonna
Totally.
lie, like was supposed to end all religion and all superstition and all this stuff, and everyone would be like good little Carl Sagans. And it's not doing that at all. Like if you go on like TikTok, which I don't, but like astrology and like witch talk are huge, and it's just like everywhere.
Yeah, I think that is hopefully like one of those visible examples of that function of like us banishing these things, and therefore they like come through in ways that we can't even anticipate.
I had an experience recently where I don't want to go too in depth because it connects to like specific places and stuff, but I had an angel demonstrate her independent existence to me. And it was accompanied with like a whole bunch of really weird syncs, and including somebody who I did not anticipate saying this, saying Archangel of Love. And it was fascinating to me because I was like, oh, the good guys are out in the world. Like it's not just us calling them in. Like there's someone on the other end of the line.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really important to remember. I think another thing I want to reiterate, because you mentioned it, is learning about the indigenous people of where you live, whether they're still there or not, you know, learning what their beliefs are about your place is like,
Absolutely.
it is not just learning about stuff. It is a participation and an acknowledgement, and like the beginning of a relationship, if you'll let it be. And it's not fucking appropriation. Like appropriation keeps people from spirits much more than it does anything else. I'm just gonna say it.
I think, yeah,
Like the
I
idea
totally
of
agree.
the idea of appropriation, right? Like, imagine like coming to this world and being so afraid of appropriation that I don't dance with the spirits that I came here to dance with. That's a tragedy to me.
Yeah, and I kind of get the intent of this idea. Like, you know, it's really like poor taste to like, you know, dress someone up at a fashion show in some kind of like
Right.
Inuit fashion or something like that. But like the way it's being presented now is like that you can't learn from other cultures at all, which is just no, like that's
Yeah.
not okay.
Right.
Like
Well, everything gets
that's
taken
almost
to its extreme, right? Like, so obviously, like, I just think it's kind of one of those things where it's like, if I'm worried that I'm doing it, I'm probably not doing it.
yeah, I think that's a good metric for
really
it.
doing it involves ignorance, like of the fact that I'm doing it. I don't know.
Yeah, my kind of yardstick on it is like, I'm not going to claim that I'm something I'm not or have access to traditions that I don't have access to. But for me, it's really important, like access to traditions I don't have access to, in the sense that I'm not an initiated like
but if you were
Santerio.
initiated into it, you would have access to it.
Exactly.
It
And like
wouldn't be
I
a
think,
matter of appropriation. It's a matter of initiation.
yeah, you would be a part of that tradition and a part of that that group.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like a covert form of like cultural supremacism in a way, because it's like you're saying that like all of these very, very good ideas in a lot of cases can't be touched. Like,
yeah. Well, and
so
another
you're
thing
basically
too,
implying, no, saying that you can't learn from another culture, or especially in like magical realms, because like magic just, like these spirits have their own agency too, and
these
that
spirits
just
have their own
closes off.
agency.
It just closes off so much of the world, like you said. Like it's this, it's very weird and very like sinister in a way.
Another way to avoid it, and like, because 90% of it is like just opening your mouth when you shouldn't. So like, if you just shut the fuck up about what you're doing, then guess what? You'll really not run the risk of appropriating other cultures.
Yeah.
Because the biggest thing is like saying that you're part of something that you're not, right?
Hmm.
So like just shut up and do the work, and it'll be okay. Not, I don't know. Maybe people get mad at me saying that, but I don't really care.
That's my idea of it too. Like if spirits, spirits are real, but like if you're living in that universe, like they need attention.
Yeah.
And
And they'll go to who's going
um
to give them attention.
yeah, there's
And you have
someone on the
no
other end of the
idea.
line.
Well, and also you have no idea what connections, what past lives, what bonds, what oaths are being enacted in this incarnation. And that's another example of like, I think that idea can only exist in a society that believes that you have one life and that's it.
Yep.
And not that it's an excuse to say like, well, I was this in another life, so I can do this. No, that's not the point. The point is that like there's a lot more going on here than we are able to really see. And if I live in a world where spirits have agency, they're going to dance with who they dance with.
Hmm. Well,
And
it's
it's
kind of
not for
like
me to say who they can dance with. It's like me telling you who you can hang out with.
it's kind of like ayahuasca, because there's a lot of, I mean, some of it, I'll be honest, some of it valid, but a lot of discussion around appropriation of ayahuasca. But I look at the behavior of this entity, and this is very much a spirit on a mission. This is very much, as far as I can tell, an entity that wants to reach people in this civilization. Um, it has definitely like made its way into that kind of cultural consciousness. I think there's a reason for that.
Yeah, some spirits want out. And the secret spirits, they'll keep secret. They'll stay secret. Like they'll find people to
Mhm.
talk to that don't run their mouth. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Yeah,
Hmm.
there's some spirits that have told me to shut up, you know? And if I want to keep hanging out with them, I better shut up. Um it's a matter of my just bump the table. It's a matter of preference. You know what I mean? They'll find someone to talk to. It's like when you ignore the muses, someone else comes out with your idea.
Yeah.
It's going to find a way out. It's like trying to dam
And
a
there are
river,
definitely,
which is what we love to do in our society too.
and we're learning all the what happens when you do that.
It's
Just kind
it
of the
is
theme of this.
apocalyptic. It is the theme of this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, I think too about how our, not to get political, but to get political, like people try to, like in the corporate world, people try to like clamp down really tight on any kind of like anger or all this other stuff, like all these very like normal human emotions. Like I kind of wonder what the effect of that is, this kind of like compartmentalization and being like all clean and shiny all the time, like in the city, like
It's fragility is the effect.
yeah.
It's like if you lived in a clean room your whole life, the moment you stepped outside, you would die because of all these like diseases that you weren't like um that you didn't know, your body didn't know how to handle.
And I kind of wonder
We
if a lot of it comes out on the internet.
Yeah, definitely. The internet is like a homunculus of the collective unconscious.
Yeah, and you get a civilization. God, if you put this on like a whiteboard in front of me and like we're gonna try this, I'm like, this is the worst idea ever. Like you get a civilization that does not believe in spirit, like actively discourages talking about it, tries
We'll
to clamp
put you
down
on
on,
medication or institutionalize you.
mhm, tries to clamp down on all sorts of human emotions and experience, and like thinks it's enlightened.
That is
Whew.
just some recipe for big dumb. Yeah.
Yeah, it fits the like kind of externalization that we've created of it a lot of time, like mass pollution, which I guess is topical at the moment.
Yeah.
Like junk, chemicals, poisons everywhere.
But only the acceptable type of pollution.
Yeah.
We only talk about the kind of pollution that fits. the narrative. Otherwise, we just arrest reporters that are trying to talk about it,
Yeah,
which is actually happening in Ohio or was happening.
yeah, and I've heard that there's a lot of like academics that will talk about stuff that's in our food, or like there'll be journalists, independent journalists that'll talk about like what's being put in the food and the medicine and all this stuff, and apparently they get emails from academics like very high up in their field saying, we know all this, we just can't say it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so yeah, this conspiracy to clamp down on major parts of human experience, and also like non-human experience too. Like we've extirpated so many animals, and I kind of wonder if it's like that with the spirits. Like you're not going to find a grizzly bear in the city most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've extirpated a lot of things, and I remember when I was growing up, there was a mountain lion that came into the city, and it was like a major thing. Like they had helicopters, they had everything going on with this thing, and
Think about how
that was a
dumb. Think
normal
about.
part of the. It was a normal part of the landscape 150 years ago.
Look, there's something we didn't kill.
Yeah,
you know, unbelievable.
yeah, we missed one.
Yeah, I think that's.
I think they did tranquilize it.
I think that is a spirit message. It's got to be, right.
Oh, did you see that the British police shot a white stag like a year ago?
Yep.
I was just like,
you did
man,
that
even
during,
if I wasn't super,
did that during the apocalypse, you moron.
I was like, and since in the state was the one who killed it,
Yeah.
and actually that's an omen of the death of the head of state. Interestingly enough,
oh wow.
because the white stag is the symbol of the king.
Yeah, right.
Queen. But that's also the symbol of the other world. Like you literally, like you shot something that was trying to give you a message. Like I know all the official rules and like safety things around it, but that just kind of tells me how insane our culture is. Like
Do you think
what?
Do you think the person that shot the white stag had ever seen Princess Mononoke?
I don't know. I doubt it. I wouldn't.
Yeah, it's kind of scary to think if they had and still shot it, like what that means, but I guess we'll never know. I'll have to get him on the show.
Yeah, see if you can find out who person who shot the white stag.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. That's a cross-cultural thing too, because in a white bison is very significant to the Dakota and Lakota.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, speaking of which, I was very heartened to hear that in southern Minnesota, the bison are being reintroduced to the state park. So after 150 years after they disappeared, they're back.
Oh, nice.
Wild bison, not farmed ones. And I was reading about some of the ecology around them, and apparently they basically are the Great Plains, because they like trample down the trees that grow, and they're the reason for this entire ecosystem. Like they are the prairie.
Did you?
And
go ahead.
Yeah, you lose them, you lose the prairie.
There's a really great video I watched about kind of how the wolves are that way too, and when wolves were reintroduced, like it actually changed the entire landscape, like just at every level. Like even the rivers were affected because the way grass grew was changed, because they were able to kind of balance out with predation certain other species, which affected the grass, which affected like how the rivers flow. Yeah, it's crazy. Like just those like things that we think are or that we've been brought to think are inconsequential have these cascading ramifications for good or ill.
Well, it's also part of the conversation about like pushing things out of human experience.
Oh yeah, great connection.
Well, I noticed too that our culture, not surprisingly, given everything else, is really bad about death. like death is a very private thing in our culture, and it wasn't in the past, and they didn't really have a choice because people died all the time. But like we really do our best to hide it.
You know what the dead
Have it.
taught me?
What's that?
The dead taught, well, they taught me a lot, but one of the things that the dead taught me was that I believed that it's dumb to die. You die when you fucked up. You die when you did something dumb. Darwin Awards. Um, oh, look at that idiot. They, tried to climb that and then it fell off. Like that we see it as failure. We see it as an inability to function. Whereas the ancients knew that death is holy, that death makes you holy, that death is what our gateway to infinity.
Yeah,
And to be revered. And so not having that, God, look around. This is what it's done.
I think something. I remember an article that there's some crazy percentage of healthcare costs are spent in the last 2 weeks of life. Like just an obscene amount of money for people to hold on just a couple more days.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And other cultures don't do that. Like I don't know. We even measure like how bad ideologies are by like how many people they killed. Just horrible in a lot of different ways. But it's like, oh, who was worse? Who killed more people? And it's just like, I don't know. I maybe haven't formulated my thoughts too much on this, but it's just like, yeah, we keep score using death as a metric of failure.
Yeah, totally. And so it's just ingrained at every level. And so let's continue to think along the lines of the connection that you made, where pushing something to the outskirts of human experience and pushing it away. If this is the same as pushing out the bison or pushing out the wolf, what can bringing death back into the fold? What can having an integrated outlook on death? What can revering death and revering the dead? How could that change the inner landscape, both on the personal level and the connective level? How can that change the collective unconscious? What will how will the rivers that flow through our dreams change their flow? How will that land take on a healthier cast? It's great to think about.
I was gonna say I don't even know if I could follow that up because that's just so perfectly stated. Like it's a wholeness.
It's we
Like
can like it can be revitalized. And the idea that the
I'm
hope is there is something that was just I'm glad to even say it right now because sometimes it doesn't feel that way.
well, we even push out childhood too. It's almost like we push out the like one end and then the other end, and it's like everybody is just a cog in the financial machine adult.
Yeah.
And that's who you are. And if
Little soldiers.
you die, I'm sorry, you lost the game and you can't play that game anymore. It's just like our schools are basically prisons for children.
Yes.
And
They're
especially with all
awful.
this testing stuff and competitiveness, and it's just like you basically have to be an adult from you basically have two courses in your life. You either become an adult when you're like 11 or you like fall off the machine, and both of those are kind of awful in their own way.
And we put kids in school like really early now.
Yeah,
They're in school at like 2.
yeah,
And
it's horrific.
yeah, I found it to be terrible. I was just and then I went to jail and it was like, oh, this is the same thing. It's the same building materials. It's the same cinder block walls with that glossy paint on them. It's the same
Hmm.
food. The same companies provide the food. It's the same ethos of, you're too loud, lock it down. Well, that's happening in a wide scale now. They just love
Mhm.
to lock it down. Um, but like, yeah, so schools are preparing individuals to adapt to prison and jail. And, as
Mhm.
the country with the highest amount of incarcerated people in the, like, I think don't we have more incarcerated people than the entire world has, like,
I think
combined or
both as a
something?
percentage and absolute number, it's higher
Yeah.
than anywhere else.
It's really scary to think about that, like, oh, like, not, it's not just this is not hyperbole that, like, we are preparing people to endure, like, to experience that. Get used to
Yeah,
jail,
and well, it's interesting too. Like, we push out old age, we push out youth, and then we also prevent them from ever meeting each other, basically.
Mm,
I know that people grow up with their grandparents and stuff like that, but you put all of these kids that are the same age in a room, and there's no role models in that environment. Like,
yeah,
I think I remember hearing that the one room schoolhouse, like, I mean, maybe not a model for right now, but apparently it actually worked really well
I'm sure.
because you'd have like a 16-year-old and a 10-year-old, and the 16-year-old learned the material by teaching it to the 8-year-old.
Yes, and the
And
8-year-old
also how
learned
to,
it from a, yeah.
yeah, and
It's
also
like
how
when
to
you get
interact with another.
people socialize, like, help each other to become, like, members of society. It's like, I don't like, actually, I have no problem comparing people with dogs because dogs are cool. But, like, it's like dogs. When you get a dog, if you get a couple dogs, they will, like, teach each other how to be dogs. And sometimes they teach each other how to, like, they'll teach trauma too if they experience that. Um,
This
yeah.
reminds me of something Patrick Harper said. He's one of my. Have you read Daimonic Reality or any of his books?
Man, I've listened to him on podcasts, but I've never read Demonic Reality. I started reading it. I guess the answer is no.
He I think he's speaking of old age. I think he's gotten to that point in his life where he has like his few stories and his few ideas that he likes, and he just kind of goes over them
Sure,
at
yeah.
this point. I think that just happens when you reach 68 or something like. Um, but he had this idea that just about all cultures have an initiation ritual, and it was what was required to become an adult. Like, I think the native group around Crater Lake, like, you had to like climb around the limb of Crater Lake, or you'd like, send people off in the woods and they had to find their way back using the knowledge that they had
Yeah.
learned while growing up from their elders. Like, it was like scary stuff. And the idea of an initiation, as far as I can tell, this might be just my read on it, but like, you had to face death in order to become an adult. And when you came back, you were like a different person. Like, there was a recognition that you were moving from one stage to another. And sometimes you even got a new name to fit that status. And Patrick Harper liked to make the point that a lot of people in our culture like seek out initiation without any kind of structure around it, um, like drugs, like flying to Cancun and like partying on a beach for spring break, like this desire to put life on the line. And so he was basically making the implication that we live in a society that tries to prevent that, does its utmost to try and prevent that encounter, and might actually be run by literal children.
Right.
Because regardless of what age they had, they never actually had an initiation ritual and have been a child for their entire lives.
I'm very much in agreement with that. I talk about it a lot. I didn't know that I didn't, yeah, I need to read him then. Because I'm very much along that line of thinking as well. Um, we are children among ruins. People talk about the post-apocalypse. You live in it. You're living in the
Yep.
post-apocalypse. It's already happened. It happened a long time ago. Um, and that might be kind of a scary thought, but actually I find it kind of liberating because it means that this is not the fucking end all be all. Because I always knew that this wasn't right. Something deep inside
Yeah.
me knew this wasn't right. And the way that expressed itself for so long until I really understood was in unhealthy ways. Once I was able to see, oh my God, this is not how it's supposed to be. Liberation.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are children among the ruins. We have not been, well, you know, no, maybe not all of us, but like that's just as a general rule, that's the experience that we're having now. Um,
And it connects to the fear of death too, because like I said, this might be just my read on it, and maybe I'm like kind of misinterpreting something Patrick Harper said, but you have to face your mortality to become an adult. You have to have a actual encounter with death.
yeah,
And so many people don't. Like all of society is this padded room.
yeah, totally. They're in the bubble, and then they're fragile. They don't have any coping mechanisms or yeah. I mean, it leaves you susceptible to all kinds of things. Advertisement being one big one, and if you turn on your TV nowadays, all of the advertisements are for drugs,
Yeah.
which is scary. I don't advise turning it on. Um,
Yeah, keep
yeah.
the demons out of
Yeah. Dude, or like a lot of the time I will actually like erect an astral barrier between me and the TV. And it's
Good
interesting
idea.
because I'm able to actually look at it and I don't want to watch it, but like it happens. Right, like you're going to be
Draws your
around.
attention, and it's like a
Sometimes you'll be around it. Yeah, man. I remember I hated that when I went to bars. It would always be football or something on the TV, and I would always be able to do nothing but watch it even though I don't watch football. I would just stare at the TV and I would think to myself, why is this happening? You know, like why can't I mean it ensorcels you. But
yeah. Sorry, you had another thought on that.
oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say that I was gonna finish. I kind of went on a tangent, but because at the gym too, if I go when I go to the gym, it's like all TVs, and I feel like they're barraging me. A lot of the time, it's news, so like I'm being propagandized and scandalized uh, while I'm just trying to run or something, you know, and uh, so that's another time when I'll put up the barrier, and it actually allows me to view it objectively and kind of take that view of like, huh, so this is like what we're doing right now, okay, instead of like internalizing it and it like kind of infecting me with its derangement.
Yeah, and it's always like CNN or something like that. Like, does
Yeah.
anyone watch CNN except for like TVs
Dude,
in
I
airports?
seriously think
Like,
I have a theory that ratings numbers come from jails and prisons
I could see that.
because there's always TV going on in there,
I
and
thought
people are always watching
isn't there a constitutional amendment prohibiting cruel and unusual punishment?
it. Yeah, they found a way around that. I guess they changed the definitions. Yeah,
Yeah,
they do be
yeah.
doing that.
It's. I feel like there's a connection there between like this kind of like propaganda and fear of death and like initiation. It's like maybe it's the fear of initiation.
Well, because
Like,
initiation is death.
yeah,
Initiation is dying to who I was. It is becoming a new person. So it's like it very much is like that death tarot card. Um,
hmm
it is stepping into a new mode of being. And so yeah, they're the same thing.
I had a friend tell me that um, he wasn't ready for the current society we have to end.
Hmm.
I thought that was really revealing.
Yeah, I
Um,
think I went through that. Even though I'd say like I always knew this was wrong, I still did some mourning for it in the past
yeah,
couple years. You know, because I think part of it is like the world that I thought I was going to live in. It's not even so much that I was attached. Well, I mean, I was attached. I think sometimes I think you just can't help it. But it's not that I was like overly attached to it, but it was just that I don't know. I just thought like it just when you have that expectation and then the expectation is subverted, there is a sense of like mourning to some extent, right? And I think that's a good thing to go through. It's like your friend, I think the fact that your friend was able to say that is actually like really powerful. Like I have hope for that person.
yeah, I thought so too. Like, it's an intuitive apprehension of what's happening.
Yeah.
Because I feel like everyone kind of knows something is wrong.
Dude, everyone does.
Like show me a well-adjusted person in this current year, and I'll show you a psychopath. Like, probably.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
maybe there are a few people that have it all together and are doing great or something, but
I mean, I don't have it all together and I'm doing great, but I am a well-adjusted psychopath, so I do relate.
I meant to say more like adjusted to this society. Like they're like,
Oh, I
yeah,
see what
we're
you're
doing.
saying. Oh,
Yeah, sorry,
no.
we're like, we're doing great. Like this is the way things are supposed to be. This kind of like deteriorating empire. Like, you know, that's what I want. It's
Yeah,
like,
someone just totally thriving in the shit show.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I wouldn't want to be within 3 miles of that person. Like I think that person is like Anthony Fauci or something. Like,
Yeah, totally. Well, I think so. I think the pangs. So I'll give a message of hope. I think that the pangs, if you're experiencing pangs now, it's because you are participating in a transition of an age or an aeon or whatever you want to call it. There's plenty of words for it. But you are participating in that change. So the fact that I am experiencing pangs or some sorrow means that I'm not holding on too strongly to the other world, actually, because if I wasn't experiencing pangs, I would be like the person you're describing. I would be in the thick of it. And so don't be too hard on yourself if you are going through that, because we're all going through that, I think, and I think even like everyone I talk to know, like you said, everyone I talk to knows there's something going on. It's just the way they describe it is in a different way, and that's fine. Some people say it's a climate collapse. Some people say it's you know new world order. It doesn't matter really, right? Like it's probably a lot of all of it. um you know but I try not to focus too much on those exteriors nowadays, and just try to kind of get to the heart of like, okay, so this person's going through what I'm going through. They're just expressing it in a different way.
yeah, and it comes back to like what we talked about last time about and then this time about like acting out the gnosis, acting out the knowledge that there are spirits out there. That, I took a prompt from an angel earlier this week. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that to my HR director.
Please do that.
That would be an interesting conversation.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good note to hit too. Because what happens when I take the prompts is that I get more prompts. And when I do things for spirits, the spirits find me because they know I'm someone that does things for spirits.
I've had maybe 2 or 3 experiences of like a named spirit that reached out to me without me reaching out to them. And one of them was Saint Expedite. And
cool.
I haven't reached out to Saint Expedite because frankly, I find him a bit frightening. I'm saving that for when I need it.
Yeah, he's good though. He'll do.
And I was like driving my car, and suddenly there was this really hot presence. Like I could feel how hot this saint was, and I knew it was Saint Expedite. I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, I did not. This is not something I did.
When you move that fast, you get hot.
And I remember I didn't even know anything about him really, and I looked him up afterwards, and I found out that hoodoo distinguishes spirits by whether they're hot or cold, and Saint Expedite is a very hot spirit. I didn't know that before.
Spicy. That's cool, man. Yeah, I love it when that kind of stuff happens too. Just that kind of outside confirmation. Yeah. Acting out the reality, like, and this may feel awkward at first.
It totally does.
It totally does. And you feel weird, right? Like, because I remember when I first started doing it, but there's like, just on the other side of that is like an amazing way to live. It's just an amazing experience. Like, and like, I just happily trounce through graveyards, praying for the dead and giving them things and um hugging trees and whatever else. And I don't care anymore what people think about it. There was a time when I definitely did.
Yeah, it took me like several months to get over that kind of like that weird hill, like, and it just like, and then it just becomes normal. And it's just like, this has just always been a part of life.
Yeah.
And I recall another thing John Michael Greer said. He made this like offhand comment about how like religions need to get their shit together. So like people, so like occultists can go off and have fun. And like, because like we have, or maybe occultists, magicians, like whatever you want to call it, like we have to pick up the tab when religions don't tell people about the afterlife or how to relate to the invisible or all that kind of stuff, and like
Yeah, we're
people
doing all the
need to
work.
know that stuff, so they'll like go searching for it.
Yeah. Um
like like
well, I
our
think
job is to mediate the worlds. It's yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's an imbalance too, right? That's interesting. That's good stuff.
Yeah, because people should be able to go like, not that I think religion is an inherent good, or I mean I think religion is just an inevitable human behavior, to be honest. But if we're talking about like specific religions, all of them have their screwed up aspects. But people should be able to go to like a priest or a bhikkhu or a monk or something like that, and be able to like learn how to relate to the invisible world, how to care for the dead, how to because like that's not most people's job. Like most people, like there's always been a need for most people to be doing other things, but like there's no resources for that anymore. Like if you go
Yeah.
talk to a Catholic priest about angels, like especially in a city, I doubt you're gonna get like anything about it.
Yeah. Which is crazy. And the internet is where that ends up. People
Mhm.
go, that's where they go for that. And I mean, I can't, it was good for me, but I don't know that it always is. It's a mixed bag, I guess, but it's probably the same with religion, honestly. Like,
Yeah, totally. Well, it's the difference between like intrinsic or extrinsic. Like there's a lot of people that get into magic for to get something. Like they view it as like a kind of easy way out, and it's not at all.
well, that's the
Um,
night. The cool thing about magic is that I got into it with that in mind, but God, boy, was I wrong. And so it was actually like that was like the carrot, you know, that
mhm.
pulled me through. And now I don't even really like do a lot of that kind of magic. I'm doing a lot more um not really results oriented, but living in the stream. And when I live in the stream brings what I need to me, you know?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people out there, especially on certain social media sites, that never get past that carrot phase.
Yeah.
Like they think it's like, oh, magic is for people who don't want to work hard or commit themselves to something. It's like,
Well, that's why I'm really into fuck around, find out, because those people just aren't doing enough magic. The more
yeah,
magic, I think the more magic that they do, yeah, the other
it'll catch
world
up with you.
will show itself. Yeah, for sure. And like sometimes that happens in like in ways that are not comfortable. You know what I mean? Like I didn't really get
Mhm.
into protection magic until my house got broken into. But that was like there is often a transgression that precipitates the lesson or the quest, And
Yeah.
to me that's been good so far.
Yeah. Well, it's like I think Reed Wildermuth was talking about this, but there's like this, people will start doing magic and then like a spirit will show up and they'll flip out and go like totally Christian, like totally like Orthodox Christian or
Yes.
something like that.
That's really interesting.
And it's like yeah, I am. This is something, maybe this is like a whole nother podcast episode probably, but I think I, like a lot of people, have a really like mixed relationship with Christianity because I recognize its power. I recognize a really deep well of things. And at the same time, I just like cannot call myself a Christian because I'm like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that's off about this.
Yeah. Totally.
I think I just read a quote recently that was like, Christianity was certainly a benevolent incident, but there are so many things before it, beyond it, and after it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I've been talking about this a little bit, and I really think that as all of these old certainties break down, like as it becomes very clear to everybody that we're not progressing into utopia, that something else is going to happen, and the world just gets weirder and weirder. I think a lot of people are going to seek shelter in Christianity. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's necessarily like a bad thing to do, but I think it's like it is a seeking shelter. Like it is a finding a strong wall to be behind. And a lot of people probably need that, honestly, but it's not how I roll.
Yeah. No. Me neither. I hope to see some weirder Christianities pop up, though. Maybe that'll happen. I want to see some
I
more
hope so.
some angel cults and stuff. Would be great. Not that that's really
Yeah,
Christianity.
I'm really hoping so. Like if there was a church that was like high ritual, like let me believe in reincarnation, and was like kind of like okay with some of the stuff that I think, I'd be like tempted to join.
Yeah, like if there were actually like Gnostic churches anywhere but like L.A. and
Yeah.
like a couple other places, I would probably check it out. I'm still not really a big into like I don't know. I'm kind of just over here doing my own thing, you know.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to like kind of what our job is too. Like I definitely think that there's a magician archetype, and I really think that it is some people's destiny. Like it very much feels that way for me. Like I cannot not do this.
Yeah,
And like I think our job is to mediate the worlds, and it's to do it outside of those structures. Like
yeah,
the job of, telling people like the five things you must think about the invisible is the job of a priest.
right.
And there's overlap. It's not a two separate circle Venn diagram, but
And I think it's
like
interesting too because there's kind of a real manifestation of that in that like I think for magicians it's much more common for us to be members of multiple smaller groups,
yep,
which is like mediating the worlds like you're talking about rather than being part of a monolith.
that's actually totally me. But
Yeah,
like
totally, man. That's the way to be.
yeah, we're governed by Hermes, by Mercury. We're the exchange. We're the spaces between.
Yes, which is also I think why angels and magicians go so well together,
Hmm.
They are also
Yeah,
that
they kind of.
mediator.
I was saying this on the Discord, but um, I kind of feel like angels got the boot out of most organized religion. Like Protestants won't talk about them at all. Like the mainline Protestants. Catholics probably not. Even if their church is called like Church of All Angels or something like that, like I doubt you'll hear them brought up.
What's interesting
Um,
though is that if you talk to people on a personal one on one smaller basis, like I remember we would talk about them a lot, like and I was a Methodist, it's pretty mainline, pretty boring. And but when we would get together in smaller groups or like Bible studies or like talking to people just one on one, everyone believes in angels. They all do.
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well,
And they will love to talk about it, but it's just weird because you don't get it on an institutional level.
I
Um,
can't recall angels ever being brought up in the Catholic Church I was raised in. I
really.
mean, maybe I was just too young, but
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean, I wasn't a part of those like smaller
I mean,
groups.
hasn't the Catholic
But
Church like kind of even moved away from saints, like in a lot of places?
yeah,
Yeah.
nobody taught me how to do a novena. That would have been cool.
Dude, right? That's a great tech.
It's actually really interesting to me how, and like I said, this might be a whole nother podcast episode. I could probably talk for a couple hours
Dude,
on angels if you ever want to do
I was
that.
gonna say, well, I wanted,
Um,
yes, I do want to talk about angels with you, and just come back whenever because, like, I love having regulars, and I think it's great because we just can continue the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And but yeah, a lot of people in the United States believe in angels. I
A
think
lot
it's
of people in
something
general
like
do.
60, yeah, something like 60 to 70%, which is one of those things where it's like they tried to push it out and it didn't quite work.
Well, okay, so first they tried to like gank it. They co-opted it, right? So like angels were around before Christianity, and then they were like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna have this," and
Hmm.
then it was like, "Oh wait, no, that's too much," and then they pushed it out. Um, that's an interesting thing to look at. Yeah, we'll look at that. Let's do that on a future
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, we got some
Um,
good stuff. Thank you so much for having me on, and I'm glad it worked out.
yeah, man. Thank you so much for coming on again, and I always enjoy talking to you. And we'll
Yeah,
do it
same.
again here soon.
Yeah, I hope you have a good rest of your evening.
Do you experience weird shit? Do your parents not like to tell their friends about what you do in the woods? Do you make more friends in a graveyard than you do at a party populated by living humans? Do you have interactions with beings that are not strictly considered human? Do other people look at you like you're crazy when you mention talking to trees in casual conversation? If you fist pump or even just answered yes to any of these questions, you may be a nightbird. So let's sing together. If you'd like to come on the show and flap your gums with me, share your stories, or just talk about the malleable nature of reality for a while, then send me an email at tim@nightbirdpodcast.com. That's tim@nightbirdpodcast.com. I'd love to have you on the show. But until then, I gotta fly. But before I go, let me say this. Remember, you are never alone. I believe you.